And welcome to Candidates Corner on LPTV, a production of the Libertarian Party and Libertarian National Committee. Whitney Dillieu serving as chair. As always, tonight, John Capso is on the big board. I'm your host, Pat Ford. And, well, there are a few purposes for our show. We want to give the Libertarian community an opportunity to meet our amazing down ballot candidates. And when I mean down ballot, I mean anything from, well, town council, water boards, school boards. By the way, it's clear after the events of the last few months that school boards are the political battleground of America. But we also have gubernatorial candidates. We have congressional candidates, state senators, state representatives, representing literally every stitch, every fabric of American political life. We want to challenge our libertarian candidates to address voter issues, voter-driven issues, often emotional, often local, to view them through a libertarian perspective. Equally important, we want candidates to focus on issues that are germane to the office they're running for. If you're running for Congress, then it's entirely appropriate to talk about our defense budget, entirely appropriate to talk about the national war on drugs. On the other hand, if you're talking about city council, zoning, school board support, school board funding, those are the issues that we like to talk about. And finally, it's critical, more so now than ever, to create a bond, if you will, a working relationship between members of, well, virtually every affiliate in the nation. That it's just important that candidates, for example, tonight in Maine, be successful to the libertarian philosophy, the libertarian movement, the Libertarian Party of Florida, of California, and, well, vice versa. A libertarian candidate running in California's success can be used to, if you will, provide a foundation for Libertarian Party candidates around the nation. Very often, the duopoly will point out to the quote-unquote lack of a bench, the lack of, if you will, up-and-coming candidates. And to that I say balderdash. We have an astonishing range of candidates running for virtually every office in America. I have had the privilege of interviewing candidates now for the Libertarian Party for probably somewhere around 2 years. And I am convinced that the people I meet tonight, some of the people I meet in the future, and several of them in the last year, will ultimately be running for national offices, both on the federal and in critically important offices like governorships on the state and local level in the future. And I have no doubt that a handful of the people that I talk to ultimately will at some point be serious candidates for the presidency of the United States. But I want to introduce tonight's candidate. Full disclosure, I'm the alternate regional rep for Region 8, which is New England and New Jersey and New York. So yeah, I'm biased. And I'm excited to introduce Harrison Kemp. He is running to be the next governor of Maine. We're going to talk tonight about the election, the issues, as well as some of the, if you will, tangential structural issues that are surrounding it. Most notably, a very important ballot access race that his efforts represent, but at the same time, some of the ballot access efforts that are going to be taking place in the next few weeks. We're going to offer you the opportunity in 2 weekends to vacation in Maine. If you've never been to Maine, well, this is your chance to get, if you will, in touch with Maine on an organic level that you probably don't get. And I'm going to suggest tonight that we start packaging petitioning efforts as, you know, expense paid visits to a variety of states around the nation, and visit really, really local local destinations. Harrison, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to LPTV. And what you got going up in Maine?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Pat. Thank you for everything you've done and are continuing to do to help me get on the ballot. I really appreciate it. And my whole team up here, the XCOM up here, we all really appreciate it. So thank you for that. What we've got going on in Maine right now is that we are trying to make the ballot for governor. If we can make the ballot for governor and continue this race, then we are going to be able to really shake up the two-party system. Because here in Maine, if you make the ballot and you are campaigning, you get on the debate stage. So we have a chance to get a libertarian who has written legislation that has been signed into law that reduces the authority of the state, and then someone who's also written the petition to get rid of certain powers the governor has during a state of emergency. Someone who's going to be able to get up there and call the two parties out for putting us in this position, especially since I'm basically running against two incumbents. So here in Maine, one of the added bonuses of this election is that even if we lose miserably and we only get 5% of the vote, we don't have to collect any signatures in the future to get our presidential candidates on the ballot. So it saves our state party, it saves our national party a lot of money and a lot of effort. So there are many reasons to support this, even if it's just for a strategic standpoint, or if you're someone who really, really loves getting out there and petitioning. Please come on up next weekend to Portland. We are going to be collecting signatures on Saturday and Sunday. As Pat said, it's an all expenses paid weekend up here. We're going to be covering your hotel and your food. So come on up, bring the wife, bring the husband, bring that grandmother of yours who's always complaining that you're gone too much. Bring her up, have fun. We're going to be hanging out with libertarians from all across New England and all across Maine. And everybody's invited, no matter what caucus you're part of, no matter what side you think you're on. If you want to come out and collect signatures, you're a real libertarian. That's how I look at it. So again, Pat, thank you for having me. And I'm just glad to be able to tell everyone about what we're doing up here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I'm a firm believer that the work is what unites us. We as a party have a tremendous amount of work ahead of us this year, but also begets a tremendous amount of opportunity. I was blessed. Aaron Adams appointed me, I think the title was project manager, for a grand tour of northern New England in the 2020 election for the Joe Jorgensen campaign. And the outpouring of support, we made, I believe it was 4 stops in Maine in the space of about a day and a half. Portland, Bangor, Lewiston, and then Bethel. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing because there's so many great libertarians in Maine. And this is just, there's a real foundation there for success. And it's important on so many different levels. First of all, as I understand, Maine still has ranked choice voting, despite some of the challenges and the duopoly fighting it.
You've got not have it. Let me just clear that up, Pat. We don't have it for the gubernatorial race.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's only the presidential race.
Presidential race and any federal office, but not state offices.
Wow. All right. So, full disclosure, Sean Lavasia is also running in this, and we're going to be collecting signatures for him as well. He's running for the congressional race. So, bizarrely enough, you're telling me you've got ranked choice voting for Sean's race, but not. Wow.
Well, other news for you. So, Sean Lavasseur has decided to really focus his energy on my campaign and put his efforts and his resources into helping me to get on the ballot and helping us to reach that 5%. So, unfortunately, Sean will not be running, but that's why it's so important to build these armies and get people out to petitioning events. So that way we don't have to have candidates making those decisions. That's why it's so important that everyone listening, every time you're going to an activist event, make 5 phone calls to your friends. Say, hey, we need to go do this. Because if we don't have the bodies, then we can't have the candidates.
Right. And it's tight. It's a difficult environment. And I want to get to your campaign, but let's just spend another couple of minutes talking about the logistics of this. Explain, if you will, the ballot access process, because, if you can start with the lawsuit. By the way, full disclosure, you are also the vice chair of the Libertarian Party of Maine. So you're intimately involved in party operations as well as a candidate. So you've got this yeoman's effort going on. You're carrying a couple of things on your back right now. So if you could start us from the lawsuit, which you won, but what the implications are for the next couple of years.
Yeah. So what ended up coming from the lawsuit, the backstory of what the lawsuit is, the state of Maine had illegally unenrolled over 6,000 of our members. And when they did that, there basically was no Libertarian Party of Maine. We had no registered members. We were just basically a social club in the very real sense of we had no legal standing at all. And after a complex lawsuit, we were able to get it to the point where now we are ballot qualified. The state of Maine has had to put in writing to every single person that they unenrolled that they were unenrolled illegally, that the first court district appeals has decided that the state of Maine was not in the right. And so that's gone out to everybody. And we're hoping that as many of them get it as possible, fill it out, return it, because that's what's going to really help give us a boost towards hitting that 10,000 number for registered members that we need, which we would want eventually to supersede that by a lot. We would like to exceed that by a lot in the future. But right now, the goal is to try and get 10,000 registered members over the next couple of years, which helps us to keep our party status here in Maine, along with getting 5% in the gubernatorial race, getting 5% in the presidential race. And what that does, it really makes it a lot cheaper for us to get ballot access and a lot easier to get ballot access. And what the judge decided is that we are allowed to collect signatures from anyone who is unenrolled, which is roughly a third of the state. So about 1/3 of all of Maine's voters, we can collect signatures from to get me on the ballot. And we only need 2,000 qualifying signatures. So it's really not a hard task. We just need some bodies and we need the weather to cooperate, which it looks like next weekend it's going to be almost 40 degrees all weekend. So it's the perfect weekend to come up.
And Portland, by the way, if you haven't been to Portland, it's a beautiful town. The old Harbor, it's gorgeous. I happen to spend some quality time up there, in addition to the tour, petitioning in 2020. And by the way, folks who've listened to the show have heard me tell this story before. It was all hands on deck in 2020 to get petitioning done. And when I tell you the margin, folks are still astonished by this. We had a whole lot of people, myself included, who went up for a couple of really frustrating days, brutally hot weather, 95 plus. You had the divisiveness of the 2020 election. You had the Rona in its full force. This was at the peak of the Rona. So folks didn't want anybody inside. Folks didn't want to talk to anybody. But, business goes on. We're having a tough winter weather-wise, but hey, we don't get any breaks. The duopoly is not interested in making this easy at any level for us. This is why teamwork is so important. So a whole lot of people went up there and spent a couple of frustrating days. And I tell the story, I'm not a great petitioner. I'm going to work on that next weekend. But in 2 days, I got something like 11 or 12 signatures. Yikes.
Yeah.
And so when I met Christopher Thrasher, who is the national, ballot access guru, I was like, Chris, here. He goes, do you need any gas money? No, just take these. I'm going to go into the fetal position in my car for a couple hours, because it was so tough. A whole lot of people did that. Harrison, what was the margin of victory in terms of good signatures in Maine? Wasn't it something like under 15 or under 20?
Yeah, it was under 20. I believe it was either 3 or 13.
Right.
Yeah, it was very, very close. And we spent, I don't know, $60,000 between what we had and what National put towards it to get onto the ballot, maybe a little more.
Right.
So it's a lot of money and it goes down the toilet when we could very easily just earn ballot access status like the Dems and the Republicans. And it's not going to take that much money to get 5%. We could spend as much money this one campaign cycle here in Maine and then save ourselves for the next 150, 200 years on all of those payments on having to get people on the ballot. It would be so worth the investment. And that's why, to anybody who is one of those donors that really cares about ballot access, this is a race for you to really care about, because we can save a lot of money for the party and we can really use this race to grow our party base, to grow our exposure. We've already been able to get onto one of the biggest conservative talk shows here in Maine. And I've already been on some YouTube channels and some other podcasts that have really big reach. And my inbox is blowing up. Our LPME Facebook page is blowing up. Everybody is interested in what we're doing, because talking about decentralization and localization, giving people back control over their own lives, it spreads across the political aisle. No matter if you're left or right, Everybody wants control over their neighbor, but nobody wants their neighbor to have control over them. So when you can
Right.
explain to people at their door exactly why the system we have now is the reason that we have what we have, and you can offer them a different way forward that's more than just platitudes, that's more than empty promises, that's actually consistent with human nature, and that's consistent with a real form of social cooperation, people tend to get sold very quickly because it makes so much sense to them.
Right. Right. And that's why, and let's get to your campaign, but that's why next weekend is an amazing opportunity. When I see the amount of man hours by immensely talented people taken up by standing on corners and asking people for a signature, I weep, because it's critically important work. It needs to be done. But imagine a libertarian universe where our primary focus is delivering the message that Harrison just brought up. That's what we need to work for. That should be our laser focus right now, so that we can do what the duopoly is most afraid of, which is engage with everyday Americans in virtually every part of the country at virtually every economic, social, ethnic level, about how important it is to support the rights of the individual, ultimate minority, which is the individual, and how important it is to learn from the disaster that we've just had over the last 2 years, and understand that the libertarian philosophy is literally the antidote for that. And had that been in place prior to the corona pandemic, then I believe that the damage, the financial, the life damage, the damage to our institutions, to our business community, would have been far less severe. Our government took, if you will, over a number of years, created an environment where an event like this brought us to our knees, and it should never happen again, nor should their powers ever be left unchecked. It is our responsibility as philosophically strong, independent men and women to, in the face of governmental, if you will, confrontation like that, to stand firm together and oppose the type of civil liberties infringements that are part and parcel of the duopoly. We have to learn as libertarians from this. We can never let this happen again. Not for ourselves, our children, and the future of our children's children. Yes, it's for the children. So Harrison, I'm thrilled that you're running, and we'll put up a couple of reminders, and we'll talk about this at the end. We end every show with what we call shameless self-promotion here, but critical to that is the events of next weekend. And by the way, I want to give due props to the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire. They have a hockey game next Saturday. We'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, we'd love to get you up to Maine, but there's a couple things going on, and LPNH needs some love as well. So, Harrison, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. The question that I ask every week, and it's funny. It's a little formulaic, but it's fun as well. How did what was the life, whether it be element, event, that brought you onto the libertarian movement and started your libertarian journey? How did you get here?
And so I enlisted in the Army right after high school. I had actually enlisted while I was still in high school, and I ended up leaving about 3 weeks after I graduated.
Wow.
So I was in the Army for almost 6 years. I went to Afghanistan. I went to Africa during the Ebola crisis. I was a heavy equipment operator. So when I was in Africa, really all I did was sit around with about 2,000 other troops, and we kind of twiddled our thumbs and wasted millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. And then we got credit for doing a bunch of stuff that contractors actually did. So that was kind of the first thing that I ever saw that awoke in me to government misspending. And that was on the real like kick in the pants of, oh, wow, our military budget, we probably spend a lot of money we don't need to. But I didn't really think about it in those terms yet, because I was still in the system. I just thought of it more as like fraud, waste, and abuse that needed to be cleaned out. And then it wasn't until I got out of the military and I started researching the Constitution, I started really digging more into economics, because I'm kind of a nerd. And I dug in, and it really didn't take long to go from my preconceived notion of what a conservative was. Once I dug into the Constitution, once I dug into what the laws actually were, to realize that we weren't conserving anything and there had to be a different way. because we aren't even following the Constitution that I had sworn to uphold and defend. So once I realized that, I knew there had to be something different. And I started really just diving down that rabbit hole of economics and philosophy. And it led me to the Mises Institute, which eventually led me to Mises and Rothbard and that whole Austrian libertarian system that's in place. And after that, I found the Mises Caucus. I had seen Michael Heiss post a thing on the page one day, and I had been an outside observer of both the LP, the Libertarian Party of Maine, and the Mises Caucus for a couple of months up to that point. And then Michael Heiss put out a call to action, and I said, you know what? If he needs somebody in Maine, I'm here in Maine, and I know what's going on, and there's really not much here, so might as well get active. And that was about 2 years ago.
Excellent. Now, in your personal life, you're an author. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've written 3 books. My first book, A Parasite's Paradise, is a historical fiction book, which intertwines a bunch of well-known historical figures, whether they be economists or businessmen or people of public ire. And I teach a history lesson through it. And it's all intertwined with Robert Nozick's A Tale of a Slave. So at every step along the way, you have to figure out, is this person free or not yet? And the whole story is encoded with different libertarian messages, different libertarian themes. And it's the perfect propaganda to give your loved ones, to give your kids, to give people you hate at work. It's the perfect Christmas gift or birthday present, I have to say. Excellent. And then the second book I wrote was it's a small little booklet. It's on economics, and it just covers homelessness. I go through, kind of the reason that homelessness is so high in Maine, some things that we could do about it from a free market perspective. And it's really just meant as an introduction for people who have never thought about economics at all. Because there's a lot of people out there who just go about their daily life, and all they really know about economics is what the stock market does. So trying to write something that relates to them, because I'm not a PhD. I'm not somebody who's, so intertwined into that system and that lingo that I can't get out of it. So I tried to write a book for the layman after reading all of those different technical pieces. And I put a bunch of original thought experiments together. And I think it's something that really could help to open people's mind up to the real situation. And then the latest book I wrote is called Closing Freedom, and it's a sales guide for today's liberty activists. So if you're an organizer, if you're a door knocker, a phone caller, no matter what you are, if you are someone who's trying to grow your affiliate or grow your campaign, then you want this book. This book is going to go over everything from phone scripts to email scripts to how to set up your meetings, setting up your agendas. It's going to show you how to make phone calls to organizers to get more donations in. It's going to cover a lot of different things that we all need to know. And especially those of us who have never worked in sales before, it can be very intimidating to ask people for their time or their money. And so, but it's something that we need to be better at if we're going to grow. Just in the last couple of days, I've made 20 phone calls to people to sign up to be signature collectors. I've gotten 12 yeses. I sent out 1,000 emails. I got 2 responses. So making phone calls is going to always be more effective than making those emails, for instance. It's just little things like that you can learn from that book. And you can find them all on Amazon. Just type in my name, Harrison Kemp, and my author page will come up, and you can find all of those.
Excellent. The phone call thing, I'm often called a boomer for a lot of reasons. But as you know, painfully probably, I'm a phone guy. I spend most of my day on the phone talking to people. And there's a connection. It's such an important point, because there's a connection you make when you're personally explaining the importance, if you will. Even in the few minutes that you've done it tonight, you lay out a vision with your discussion of the ballot access drive, cause and effect, underlying issues, underlying challenges, and you get buy-in that way. And I get, listen, in my day life, I run a startup digital media company which does original programming. So do I understand tech? Yes, I do. But we as libertarians, one of our challenges, I believe, because a lot of us are a little bit more insular. We're as President Bush might have said back in the day, we're a little bit more philosophically orientated. All right. But we have to find a way to make connections with people. And as Larry Sharp is likes to say, plant that seed, plant, that seed of information, and maybe a little bit about that seed of doubt. We don't need to argue with people, but we need to actually connect with them. And, I could tell that's going to be a big part of your campaign.
Well, and one thing that I go over in the book, and I go through the whole sales process, I go through one of the most important things, for instance, that I talk about is knowing what kind of libertarian you are and knowing what your organization is. Because if you're doing something for the Libertarian Party and someone comes up with a question that you have your own answer for because you're a certain type of libertarian, but it's not exactly what the Libertarian Party itself goes with, how do you answer that?
Right.
These are important questions that we as people who are trying to be activists need to know, because it's important to know how to bring in like-minded people, but it's also important to know how to bring in people who don't exactly agree with you.
Right.
And I often find that the easiest way to connect with people is just ask them flat out, upfront and honestly, as bluntly as you can, when you go into the voting booth, what is the number one issue that affects how you vote?
Right.
And people
Absolutely.
will tell you. People want to talk. And once they tell you, ask them, why is that? And why is that? Just keep repeating that question until they have nothing left to say. And then you offer the libertarian solution. But you don't just ask them, well, what's your number one issue? And they'll say, well, abortion, for instance. And then you just jump into the libertarian position. You're not going to connect with them that way. All you're doing is showing them that you think you know more than they do. But if you can hear them out and then respond to actual points that they bring up and show that you're listening to them, people are always going to be more receptive, even if what you're talking about they would normally consider crazy.
Do you find people are starved for that kind of connection with their elected political leaders?
I really do. I think that a lot of people have come around to the idea that our government does not have the consent of the people.
Right.
And this is a point I've already stressed in this campaign, and I'm going to stress until the day the campaign is over, that the government does not have the consent of the governed. Therefore, it's no longer a government. It's something else. Right. And the only way that we can come back in line with the meaning of the word government is to bring a little bit more of a voluntary society feel to it. Now, that doesn't mean that we install anarchy tomorrow. What that means is that we get the government out of our bodies, we get the government out of our kids' schools, and we get the government out of our jobs. That's really what people agree with for the most part, no matter what side of the aisle they're on. You will find on the extremes, people are always going to want to have control over other people, no matter if it's extreme right or extreme left. But for the 85% of people who are in the middle, there's a lot of compromise they're willing to make, as long as you are actively listening and taking what they're saying into account and explaining yourself. And one thing I always think is important for elected officials, I've always kind of said that I think every politician should have a podcast. And the reason is because if every politician had a podcast where it was just them talking for, say, 2 hours a week, and they had to actually talk on things of substance, we would very quickly realize that our politicians have almost no information. They know nothing. They don't have a very good understanding of what's going on, and that's why they talk in sound bites.
When I testify, and I occasionally still do it, even though I work in the media, I would always open up my testimony with the fact I would declare myself that I am in fact a free market capitalist. I believe that capitalism is the mechanism by which the individual reaches their full human potential. I consent to be governed. A consent I reserve the right to withdraw at any time. Those two statements, in your own words, if you will, and everyone finds their own voice to this, needs to be reinforced, not just to those who would, they would have us serve under their yoke, but also to individuals who inadvertently wake up one day finding themselves to be slaves to the state. And when they hear other people making pronouncements like that I am in fact ungovernable, that I have no gods, no masters. When I say that, people are like, oof, Oh, and then you don't have to inflict that on people. Just merely make the statement, not just in words, but through the actions of your everyday life. People see that and recognize that, they pick up on that, and they find a way to internalize that to their own comfort level. And that begins the real revolution, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think this is why every revolution we've seen has been successful has really been about kind of populism. It's been about things that matter to the most amount of people, but
Right.
in a real way. And I think every good revolution you've seen, that was something that was built on individuality, on individual rights and civil liberties. I think every revolution we've seen that ended very poorly has been about taking away those civil rights and that individual control.
Mhm.
So if we're going to have a revolution that ends peacefully and actually saves the nation rather than letting it spiral out of control like it has been, then we have to take over the government. It's just that simple. Because when libertarians take over the government, we don't expand the government, we shrink the government. And in
Right.
many areas, we eliminate the government. That's what we need to do because people are so tired of being told what they're allowed to, oh, excuse me, that they're allowed to go to work or not. They're tired of having to figure out, well, can my kid go to school today or not? And we're 700 days into this thing. We're coming up on re-election for our current governor, and we're still having to deal with these things. People are ready for a change. I'll tell you, looking at my website analytics, we are getting a lot more traction than the amount of articles that these main newspapers have written about me so far. And I know that because they haven't written any about me, and our Google analytics are blowing up. And we've been on giant podcasts and giant radio stations here, and they won't report on us at all. But that's what we can expect as libertarian candidates. We can expect to go door to door. We can expect to have to go to tiny town halls and hold signs up and have our petitioners go stand in the cold. We can expect to do those things, but that's what we have to do in order to win. And remember that every single day that we go out and fight, the duopoly is fighting even harder because they have 1,000 times as many people as we do.
Mhm. Right.
And they've got all the lawyers and they've got all the money.
Mhm.
So it's an uphill trudge, which is why we have to continue to fight, and we have to continue to go out and help other states and help our own state when we have the opportunity. You know, if you're in a state that has had the advantage of growing big and putting in a real staff and figuring out how to win some elections, I mean, I'm not somebody who likes to force people what to do. That's literally the opposite of what we're all about. But I think you kind of have a duty to the party, in a sense, as a leader of the party, to help other people learn how to do that. And if
Yes.
they don't take your advice, that's on them. But, you know, try and lay the groundwork for others. And that's what I did with my book. I tried to lay the groundwork for other people. And everything that I learned on this campaign trail, for instance, it'll go into the second volume when it comes out. And then there'll be even more information for people. And I think that's something that we as people of experience should be doing for others, is really helping to train and build up these lists and get activists active and trained up. And I think it's so important for all of us to just really take ownership of the party. And if you don't take ownership of the party within your state, within your county, then you can't be mad if something happens at the national level that is out of your control, because, you know, the party is made of who shows up, as they say.
Yeah, well, you have to lead a libertarian life, and that's so important because ultimately, people you're surrounded by take that in, they absorb that, and what I mean by a libertarian life is not engaging in coercion, but also understanding that if you're looking to sublimate the government's role, if you will, in responses to need, then you as a libertarian need to take the time and the effort and the whatever resources you can bring to bear. It's all obviously highly individualized, but you need to do that so that you become part of the movement that replaces government in responding to people's emergency needs and crisis. And you be that, then that gives you the opportunity, if you will, and the moral authority then to work out and work into other areas of challenges, whether it be the war on drugs, the war on sex workers, the war on our veterans, the war on that government wages against us every day. Lead that libertarian life, and people around you will blossom. You don't need one of the things, Harrison, we always joke about on this show is that we don't like the word govern. We like the word steward. And I'm working to try and replace the word govern with the notion of stewardship, that we have no ownership over other people's assets. The government has no claim or right to claim other people's, whether it be their assets, both philosophically, financially, morally, they have no right to that.
Yeah,
We have to
I'm
reinforce
fine with
that.
that term. I use the word govern and government because it's what 99% of people understand, because
Right.
we went through government schools, and therefore, unfortunately, many of our vocabularies are not quite where they should be.
Such
And
schools.
I say this as a product of government schools who is now an author. And when I left school, I absolutely hated reading. I hated writing. I hated public speaking. I hated all of it. I wanted no part of it. And now I've written 3 books. I do public speaking all the time, and I lead a very creative lifestyle. So why was that beat out of me when I was a kid? And we have to ask ourselves that. And then we have to take a look at just the way that this coronavirus has been handled with the locking down of the schools, because we can see that on a massive scale where obesity rates have gone way up, kids' depression levels have gone way up, the amount of deaths of despair for both kids and adults has gone way up. And yet we have a gubernatorial candidate here in Maine whose policies have led to the suicides of children, and she thinks she's qualified to run for governor.
Right.
I don't think that's right. I don't see how you can do that, how you can put policies in that have led to people losing their livelihoods and then think that you're qualified to somehow make decisions for other people.
Right.
And that's the message we need to be spreading to people, because people can understand that message.
Why do you think in society today, the notion of personal independence, body autonomy, self-reliance, stewardship, self-ownership, why and at what point did that become controversial? Wasn't that in a prior time, wasn't that considered the ideal?
Well, it was considered the ideal, but it hasn't ever really been practiced. And, when you look at American history and you take more than just the look that our high schools and public education gave us at it, you realize that we've never had a system of stewardship here in America, outside of small rural areas where, the mayor is friends with everybody and everyone's on a first name basis. But the big governments, like the real cities, the real towns, the real state, like we have never had a system of real stewardship. We've always had governments that have told people exactly what they can and can't do. And we see this where just 10 years after the Constitution was ratified, they put in the Alien and Sedition Acts that limited how you were able to speak. So very quickly, they violated the very first thing that is in the Constitution. And so we've never had a system of actual stewardship. And that's why, people will ask me, well, you're a libertarian and then you talk about the Constitution. Why is that? And the reason isn't because I necessarily think the Constitution is all that great, because it's a piece of paper. It may lay out a great system, but it in practice has not done much to create its own system that is written. So when I talk about the Constitution, and when I think libertarians talk about the Constitution, how we should talk about it, is that it's the legal framework for us to use to roll back the state. Because we are so far away from a constitutional government, from a minarchist government, from any of that, that none of our differences on, well, I'm a libsoc, I'm an ANCOM, I'm an ANCAP, I'm a minarchist, I'm a this, I'm a that, none of that matters. We're so far from any of that mattering. And if we let those little differences keep us from getting out there and petitioning or making phone calls, then we're going to end up even further down this path. And there's no coming back once you get to a certain point without a violent revolution. And I think that a violent revolution is just about the last thing anybody wants. We don't want that. that's why it's so important that we go through this political process. And in addition to the writing of books and the podcasts and getting on news stations and whatnot, and spreading the message in every single way possible.
It's interesting. There was and a couple of quote unquote highly placed libertarians were part of this. There was a mini backlash over the last year against folks starting podcasts. And I get it. It can be humorous. I started mine little effort as a one person, buying some time on a local radio station. And I get the concept that there are thousands of podcasts that are literally in people's basement garage. But I love that about our movement. At what point in time does anyone feel it's inappropriate for individuals to gather together and take advantage of technology to spread the word at any level? Some are bigger than others. Some are more successful. Some are more, I don't know, more professionally produced.
Well, like,
But
I used to have a podcast that got about 4 listeners a month, and it didn't matter. It wasn't about the people listening. It was about me being able to explore ideas,
Mhm.
and with that, being able to really get comfortable in front of a camera, in front of a microphone, and get comfortable being wrong. Because one thing we as libertarians like to do, and we do it because it's human nature, is that we get so caught in where we're at that we're unwilling to change our mind on anything.
Mhm.
And if you allow that to happen to yourself and you don't take that step back and say, okay, I may have been wrong on this, whether it's a person, whether it's economic concept, whether it's a historical idea, whatever it may be, could even be the best way to butter your bread. I don't know. If you're open and willing to have your mind changed on things that are important in life, then you're always going to be able to have a better connection with other people. Because if you're
Mhm.
expecting people to change their mind, but you're so stubborn that you're unwilling to change yours about anything, you're not going to be a very good convincer. Now, that
Right.
doesn't mean that you have to be so pliable that you always go with the last idea you hear. Because if you do that, then you have no backbone and no one can trust anything you say. So you need to try and find that middle ground. And I think when we create podcasts, it gives us that space to find that middle ground where, especially if nobody's listening, you can say, well, I said this last week. I did a little bit more research and I was wrong. Turns out it's this. And then you can move on. But those people who start podcasts or write a blog, that can always turn into something much more. One of my blogs ended up being turned into one of my books. And then one of the books ended up getting turned into a really long format podcast I did with someone of importance. And so it's like all of these things have snowball effects.
Mhm.
Or even if it's just that you are now more comfortable talking about the libertarian idea in whatever topic, that's amazing. Even if nobody else has ever read that and you didn't change a single mind with your blog post, next time you go knock a door or make a phone call, you're going to be more comfortable when that situation or that topic
Right.
comes up. So, yeah, I encourage everybody to start a podcast, even if you don't get any listeners, even if nobody reads your blog, even if you never get a single advertiser. Just ramble, let your mind go, talk about the things of importance to you.
Mhm. Folks, if you're just joining us, Harrison Kemp is here. He is with the Maine Libertarian Party. He is the vice chair. As importantly to tonight's conversation, he is a candidate to be the next governor of the great state of Maine. Let's talk about the campaign a little bit. You brought up an interesting point in as we sort of onboarded the show when you talked about running against two incumbents. Mr. Lepage is the rather fascinating study in personality that was a former incumbent for the Republican Party. And then you have the current occupant. First of all, I've got to ask just, I prefer more to talk about your reflection on the issues, but as we're all political handicappers, we're all junkies, we all want to talk the election. There were times when is it Lepage came across, and I'm a libertarian. He came across as a freaking lunatic. What is this guy all about, and how is he running again?
Well, really, from what I can tell from his history, from the amount of time that he's given to certain organizations, he is somebody who has this kind of idea that if he can approach the fringes of the right and he can solid up the Republican base, he can win. And here in Maine, we have kind of two states. We have the southern part, which typically votes Democrat, and then we have the northern part, which typically votes Republican. And they're two very, very similar in culture for the most part, areas where everyone kind of wants to be left alone and whatnot. But once you get into the bigger cities, you do start to get more into that kind of modern day liberal policies that a lot of people on the right don't like and a lot of libertarians don't like. So, from what I can tell with the page, he buys into unfounded conspiracy theories about the Constitution. Which I'm a libertarian and I can tell they're unfounded constitutions. So, if you've
Right.
got the guy who's sitting around going, well, I don't even know if this document's the best thing in the world. And I'm telling you that no, that is like exactly by how it was done. Like it was done perfectly legally. And you're still sitting there, well, I don't know, because this guy with a radio station tells me. Like, okay, gotcha, Paul. And then not only that, but COVID lockdowns hit. Guess what? I was here in Maine writing the initiative to eliminate the governor's authority to continue those lockdowns. Paul LePage was in sunny Florida, just soaking in the sunshine, enjoying his days, and not having a care in the world. Meanwhile, me and thousands of other patriots here in Maine were fighting every single day to end these lockdowns.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, we weren't very effective for the most part because they're still going. But I don't see how someone can literally run away from their home state when the worst civil rights crisis in the world is going on. And then you act like, oh, it's no problem. I'll just come back and fix it all afterwards. Like this governor is literally locking people in their homes, locking their businesses down. You're supposed to be the conservative hero of Maine and you're gone. There's nothing conservative about that. And not only that, but when he was governor, he actually ended up raising taxes on poor people. He tried to pass it off like, oh, we didn't mean to do that. Yeah, you knew what you were doing, fool.
What are the issues right now? We call them on the show lunch pail issues. You've got essentially two approaches to, and I always refer back to Bill Clinton's war room. It's the economy, stupid. On one hand, you've got the big C. I mean, that's half the room. There's always going to be the debate, the controversy, the issues surrounding the pandemic. But then you've also got, when somehow we can just kind of put that on the shelf, we've got these day-to-day issues. What's consuming Mainers the most? Is it education? Is it taxes, development? Talk to me.
Well, we have quite a few issues, but I think they're issues that every state has right now. It's, dealing with the rising consumer prices.
Right.
Everywhere you go in Maine, gas is incredibly expensive. Food is incredibly expensive. Stores are missing quite a few items that used to be in high supply. And it's really affecting us because, Maine, we have a very rural population in a lot of the state, and we are on the lower end of the income spectrum for the country.
Right.
So when prices rise, we feel it more than a lot of other places feel it.
Right.
And with that too, like we have some high taxes, depending on what town you live in, which this isn't something I could fix as governor, but it just contributes to the problem. Your property taxes are extremely high, and people are not getting what they used to out of the schools. When I went to high school, for instance, when my little sister went to high school, we played sports, we did theater, we did clubs, we did things after school. So my mother always felt like she was getting her money's worth in a sense. But now, where my youngest siblings are being educated over Zoom half the time because someone has COVID, and it's been that way for quite a while, she's like, what am I getting for all the property taxes that we pay? What do we get for this? And I'm like, well, welcome to libertarianism. That's step one, finally starting to question your relationship with the government. And what do you get for all the money that they confiscate from you on a weekly basis?
Wait a minute. Wasn't she part of that social compact? The one that we've never been able to find that said, for the, and I'm going to use these words very carefully. I don't want anyone to get upset. It's kind of like one of those motion sickness videos. for the greater good, wasn't it? I
Yes.
never signed that. Did you ever sign that one? I missed that.
I did not sign that contract, although, this is something I've actually kind of questioned myself on, right? So I took an oath of enlistment. I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Well, where does that leave me now? Right? Because I want to protect and defend the Constitution, but what does that actually mean these days when we are so far removed from the Constitution? Right?
Mhm.
It's a very big question that me and many other veterans who are also libertarians of many different philosophical strains, we all ask each other this question. And none of us has a real answer, because all we can really do without violence, which again is the last thing we want, that's why we're all involved in this political spectrum here, is so that we can avoid the country going down that way, I think. And we ask ourselves, well, what can we do? Protesting doesn't work. They don't care if we protest. All right, so we don't pay our taxes. That works for about 3 years. Then you get arrested. What can you do? The answer always ends up being, well, you got to run for office or you have to have a Joe Rogan sized podcast. Well, no one who's anti-war at that level and only talks about issues like that is going to get as big as Joe Rogan. They won't allow it. And I just think that nowadays it's so important for people who have really they've become misaligned with the system. They used to have faith in it, and then they started questioning it, or maybe they had an experience with the cops or with their local government that led them to start going, hey, what am I paying all this money for? It's prime time to bring those people into libertarianism. The parents who are going to the school boards and trying to overthrow the school boards, it's not time to let them go to the Republican Party. It's time to bring them over to the Libertarian Party where they belong. And yeah, maybe they're not the best on some other issues, but we got books for that. We've got podcasts for that. We've got meetings for that. We've got time to engage with these people and explain to them that, hey, maybe your position on war isn't what you want it to be. Maybe here's something that actually agrees with your sensibilities more than what you already think. And a lot of people, you'll find that once you explain libertarianism to them without all the labels, without oh, I'm an anarcho syndicalist, I'm a minarchist, when you just talk to them face to face about the issues and break away from those labels, people agree with you most of the time.
Mhm.
And they might not agree with you on every single issue. And, you might go to some meeting with, say, a Tea Party group or BLM group or whatever group it might be, and you might disagree on 70% of the things with them. But that 30% you agree on could be an extremely important 30% to form some type of a coalition around, even if it's with the people, the individuals, not the organization. I've gone to organizational meetings for groups that I knew I wasn't going to want to be part of, but I knew I could probably find one or two people in there who agreed with what I was going to say or with what I wanted to do with my vision. And that was somebody I could add to our roster and take away from that group who was going to bring them somewhere bad. And you can do that very easily with people on the right. It's very easy to pull people who are going to these Republican type meetings and get them over to the libertarian side because they're already speaking our language. They're already talking about freedom. They're already talking about rights, talking about the Constitution. So if you can just then convince them, hey, your rights don't come from that piece of paper. They come from the fact you're a human. You've won. So you have one thing to convince them of, you know? So
And by the way, that thin blue line that so many people on the hard right worship are the ones who are going to come and take away your guns, and they are the ones who have enforced, despite the extra constitutionality, if you will, have been very happy to enforce these COVID restrictions and have been very prominent in doing so. But part of your experience that I want to highlight, because we got a little bit of time left before we get into the promotion thing, is some of the work that you've already done, and in a clear area of overlap, particularly with folks who might be left of center, is criminal justice reform.
Mhm.
And there's great areas of agreement there. And I think you've highlighted a significant issue in the libertarian movement tonight, and that is there aren't enough of us to get people elected. So ultimately, we've got to get other people who aren't libertarian to vote for us, or we're not going to get elected. If we don't get elected, we're not going to be able to engage in some of the fundamental change that we know is a necessity for our country to continue to even exist. Now, we talk about criminal justice reform. Let's talk about the process that you were engaged in for no-knock raids. And I think there's universal agreement. What do they say? The easiest concept in the history of time, that no-knock raids are an abomination. They are a central threat to the peace of any community in the sense that their constant presence, hovering, if you will, over a community breeds that type of distrust between law enforcement and encourages overreach by law enforcement in a manner that's both physically and I believe politically dangerous. So talk to us about your engagement with prohibition of no-knock raids and how that process went for you, because it's something that I think not only needs to be highlighted to Mainers, but your ability to be involved on a highly intimate level with that process is a lesson for literally every libertarian who ever listens to this podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. That's something that I'm really proud of. When I'm on my deathbed and I look back, that's probably the number one thing I will have been proud of, is that I was the author of the original bill that ended up banning no-knock warrants here in the state of Maine. So
That's outstanding. Dude,
I
that's
had
outstanding.
Thank you. I wrote a bill, and I had actually written up about 8 bills, and you can find most of the ones that did not end up getting picked up last time on my website, kempformaine.com. And I brought it to the LP of Maine, and I said, hey, I really would like to do this. I think that you guys could help me. Would you want to do this? And this was before I was part of the executive committee. I had just started getting involved with the party. I had always been kind of an outside agorist. And then I was like, I really got inspired by what the 10th Amendment Center and what Michael Bolden were doing. And I decided that I was going to try and do it that way, because the podcast wasn't working. The blog wasn't working. Nobody's reading the books. You've got to find a way to actually make change somehow. So I wrote this bill, and I ended up scouring the internet for existing legislation that banned no-knock warrants. I found a really good one, and then I ended up adjusting it for Maine. I ended up going back through and writing several versions of the bill before it ended up passing. But a friend of mine and organizer of the Maine Liberty Alliance here in Maine, Don McCann, was able to hook me up with Representative Rader and Representative Fecto. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. So we had bipartisan support for this bill before it was ever submitted, before it ever made it to committee. And then once we were able to get that, I had meetings with both of them. I wrote a bill specifically for each of them. So there was a Republican bill and there was a Democrat bill. And the reason we do that is so now these bills have to be talked about twice. The Democrats have to talk about it and the Republicans have to talk about it, rather than it just being a regular bipartisan effort. So then right at the last minute, we ended up combining the 2 bills into one bill, and it got watered down a little bit with some last minute amendments on the committee, but it ended up passing unanimously, and it was signed into law last year by Governor Janet Mills. So as much as I dislike her for everything she did with the COVID, she did do what she was pretty much legally prescribed to do and did not veto my ban on no-knock warrants. And I am so thankful to Representative Rader and Representative Fecto for helping me along that process and really helping to make a positive difference here in Maine, that it spanned across political parties, no matter if you were on the right or on the left. And that was right after the Breonna Taylor incident. And one thing that a lot of people on the right didn't even think about is that when we send our men and women into... Oh, that's awesome, O'Donnell. So when... I'm sorry, I forgot what I was talking about there.
You were talking about when you send your young men and women into battle. No worries. No worries. So, but let me point out what should be obvious to everyone about this process, and that is the importance of writing legislation. So you'll hear the scream, but we don't have anybody in the legislature.
Oh,
Well,
yes. Okay.
it-
Sorry, when you brought the comment up, my eye caught it, and I got off track there for a moment. Yes. So what we ended up doing was we got the Republican on board, we got the Democrat on board, and they basically just went out and started convincing their independent parties that this needed to be done. It got combined at the last moment, and it ended up passing. So when we aren't able to get into the legislature and able to, convince everybody that we should pass a bill or that we should repeal a bill, what you can do is write the bill yourself, whether it's a bill to outlaw something, a bill to repeal something,
Yep.
or it's a bill to put in an existing protection. You can write that piece of legislation and take it to one of your representatives. Even if it's not the perfect bill, they'll help you write it. They've got staff for that. So just take your ideas and be as libertarian as possible in your first drafts. So that way, even after it gets watered down, you can still accomplish 75% of your goal. And that's what we did with the ban on no-knocks here. And it's unimaginable, and it'll be untold how many lives we've saved from it in the long run. But one thing to really keep in mind, if you're going to do this in your state, the left is already going to be on board with it. But the right, who is all about back the blue and we need to support our cops. Okay, if you want to support our police, don't send them into situations where they can legally be shot at and people don't have any repercussions for it. Because that's what happened in the Breonna Taylor incident. Her boyfriend shot at the police, rounds struck feet away from the cops, and he did not face any charges for it. Now, we as libertarians go, good. He shouldn't have faced charges for it. But people on the right, who are all back the blue, they don't want to send the police into those situations. And I don't want to send the police into those situations. I don't want to send anybody into a situation where they could get killed for no reason. There is no sense to that. And
right. The sign of ultimate respect to our young men and women in uniform, regardless of what that uniform is to ensure, to whatever degree possible, we aren't entering them into combat, whether it be of an international flavor or a highly local urban flavor. And that's how you respect people in the law enforcement or military community. Let's make less martyrs of them. Let's make less conflict. Fight for ways to reorient our criminal justice system so that it's a bottom-up organization that reflects the values of that community, not some hierarchical madness where people are judged based on how many cages are filled with people. So but as importantly, I just wanted to talk about this process because you were able to address a critically important issue and you were successful. A lot of hard work. More often than not, it's not successful, but that doesn't diminish the importance of the effort. And here's why. If you write a bill and submit it to the basics of it to the duopoly and they refuse to accept it, that's a political event that should be capitalized on. If they take it and they write it and they bring it to committee and the committee won't hear it, that's a political event that needs to be, if you will, amplified. If they take it to committee, discuss it, and refuse to bring it to the legislative floor, again, another opportunity for you to take current events and extrapolate your political philosophy out to the greater community. And if, in the case that what you were able to accomplish was actually to get the damn law changed and to save some lives, then you've got the ultimate victory. But every step up until then is almost as important. Engaging with the machine to make fundamental changes creates a legitimacy for you politically and a legitimacy for our philosophy and our party that can't be brought at any other way to that level.
Well, not only that, but we're able to build email lists that are focused on specific issues. Right. So if somebody's going to agree with you on an issue like no-knock raids, they're probably going to agree with you on just about every other police reform issue you're going to bring up.
Yep.
So that's someone that you want to target if you're doing an event for police reform, if you're doing something for drug legalization, if you're running candidates in their area. Those are people you want to stay in touch with. Right. Now, you don't need to send them everything about the guns or about all of the taxes being reduced. Just make sure that you've built that relationship and that coalition off the one issue they care about. And then you can go from there, and you can talk to them more when you're at that next event about, oh, well, have you ever thought of this or that? But don't ruin those connections, those people who are willing to be allies, willing to show up to testify, just so you can like bring them into the Libertarian Party or into all of libertarianism. Because I'll tell you, I would much rather have someone who's like a self-devout socialist that I know at any moment I can call and say, hey, you know, there's a bill up to keep the guard home. Will you call? And they go, yes, I will call and testify. I would much rather have that person be a socialist who will never vote for me and make that phone call every time to vote against the war machine than I would to ask them to come over to the party and lose them forever. So don't get greedy in your outreach. That's another thing. I've done that before. But I really think that when we're trying to reach these other groups, these people who don't see eye to eye with us on everything, if you give just the most libertarian answers you can to their questions, and you treat them like adults, and you're open and honest, and you don't lie to them for their own good, it doesn't matter if they agree with you or not. They're going to work with you in the future on something. We as libertarians agree with such a wide swath of people on so many different things that you can always hyper focus in on one issue and use that. It's really something that I'm very happy that I have the campaign manager I do, Samantha Brown, because that's one thing she is amazing at, is building email lists, attacking email lists, and reminding people of, hey, this is what we agree on. Remember, we agree on this thing and we're fighting for this thing. It doesn't matter that we disagree on economics or guns or whatever. And because of that, she's been very successful at helping to the cannabis movement here in Maine. And so those are the types of people that I think we need to surround ourselves with as libertarian candidates, is people who have track records of winning. Even if it's not winning massive races, it's not getting giant pieces of legislation through, you have to just connect yourself with people that have more experience at winning than you do.
Absolutely. Well, we've kind of, and we're going to have you on the show again, particularly as we get closer to the election, after we get over this whole registration, petitioning. It makes me insane. But let's engage in some shameless self-promotion. And before we go, John, I just want to make sure that we put up a little blurb about what the folks in New Hampshire are doing. But let's talk about, how can folks find you? How can folks read about you? How can folks find ways to contribute to you? As critically important, how folks can contribute to ballot access in Maine. Give us the whole picture.
Yeah, so if you want to support ballot access as a whole in Maine, go to lpme.org/donate and make an earmarked contribution for ballot access. If you want to donate to my ballot access purposes, go to kempformaine.com kempformaine.com. Man, there's so many URLs, Pat. Go to kempformaine.com/contribute and make a donation. Every $5 helps to buy a signature. That's the way that math breaks down. So please go over to kempformaine.com/contribute, make a donation right now. So that way we can really make the most of next weekend and make the most of the next couple of weeks that we have to finish collecting our signatures. We're going to be bringing activists up from all around New England. So if you're within short driving distance of Portland, a couple hours away, we'd love to have you. This is going to be an awesome weekend for New Hampshire and Maine, Rhode Island, Vermont, hopefully some New Yorkers and Rhode Islanders and Massachusettsians to come on up and really just get together. Hotel is paid for, food is paid for, so please come up and join us. And that same weekend, we're also going to be doing just hanging out. We're going to go out to dinner at night. We're going to have a chance to really get through all of the inner party baloney that goes on a lot of times. Because as Pat said earlier, when we're active, we don't argue. When we're active, we win. So we need to get active. We need to get out. And if you want to learn more about me personally and about my campaign, go to kempformaine.com. I've got all kinds of legislation up. I've got all kinds of policy proposals and a blog up there about what would happen if I was governor right now. We've got a bunch of media that's going to be getting uploaded in the next few days, so make sure to check back pretty frequently and share it with your friends. If you don't live in Maine, but you're somebody who's very interested in elections going on around the country, make sure that you're telling your friends about this race, because we're really trying to make a difference here and we can't do it without you. So I'm asking everyone who lives in Maine, for one time in your life, vote Libertarian with me, vote Kemp for Maine, and be part of the revolution.
Outstanding. Harrison, hang on for a second. I know we want to do a quick promo for our friends in New Hampshire. I love this idea, by the way, folks. So if you're a native of the New York metropolitan area, as I am, one of the fiercest hockey matches on the planet, interestingly, has nothing to do with the Rangers, the Islanders, the Devils, the Bruins, or anything yet. It is, in fact, New York's finest versus New York's bravest, which is the New York Fire Department versus the New York Police Department. This has the opportunity to be equally compelling because you got a bunch of Republicans playing hockey with a bunch of those libertarian types. And I couldn't pull it up just because of copyright issues, but I have this mental image of, there's a movie out there, New Englanders. It's a cult favorite in New England. Paul Newman in Slapshot. So I have this mental image of a few New Hampshire guys in dark old style glasses going at it with the Republicans. And if you're like me, or maybe a little bit of a combative personality, you're hoping that you're going to a fight where occasionally a hockey match will break out. That being said, there's a family skate. It sounds like a hell of a good time. Obviously, we've got a little bit of a scheduling conflict here between New Hampshire and Maine, but
theirs is the weekend following me, Pat.
Oh, I thought it was next weekend.
No, theirs is the weekend following mine. That's why I scheduled mine this weekend, and theirs is that weekend.
All right, great. That would be outstanding. Listen, these are the kind of events we need to have more of everywhere. And by the way, hats off to the people in Connecticut this past summer who threw some amazing liberty events. In one case, the one I went to, there were a couple of thousand people there listening to rock and roll, speeches about liberty. Joe Jorgensen showed up. So there are outbreaks of liberty happening all over New England. And hats off to all of these states, because you have to live here to understand what a fundamental challenge it is bringing the libertarian philosophy to the bluest part of America. I know everyone likes to think that, no, I'm sorry, man. If you've ever spent quality time in Rhode Island, Socialist Workers Paradise, Rhode Island and Vermont, holy cow, Massachusetts, People's Republic of Cambridge. And let me tell you, as someone who spent 2 days in Portland at a whole paycheck, that's what we call Whole Foods, trying to convince folks that personal responsibility, self-ownership would actually improve their lives. So, hats off to everybody. And I want to close off with this. We haven't had a show in a couple of weeks because we've just, weather challenges aside. So I mean this when I say this to candidates. You are on the level of, I call it personal heroism, in being a candidate for office here in New England, anywhere in the country, actually, as a libertarian, is phenomenal to me. I have nothing but profound respect for people who are willing to uproot their lives and take on these challenges, take it to the streets. If you will, the sacrifice of family time, of work time, simply sitting back and watching a Bruins game time, is just amazing. To me, as libertarians, we have maybe a little bit different look on patriotism. But I will say this, short of serving in our nation's defense, running for office as a libertarian, I believe, is the most patriotic thing, one of the biggest acts of love you can perform for your community and your family. And so my hat's off to you. My hat's off to folks across this country. I believe the bench is now. I am highly optimistic about the future of the Libertarian Party, despite some of the internal challenges we're facing, because we have the people now who are running for office, who are carrying that message to the electorate. Some are successful, some are not in the sense of winning or losing, but all are incredibly successful in delivering a highly principled libertarian message to voters everywhere. And that's what has to happen. These are people who live libertarian lives, who are willing to make the personal sacrifice to take the next step up and fight fight for office. And it's a profound reflection on our founders of our movement. We're in our 50th year as a political movement and as a party. And to those people who are still with us, who took the time to be the first libertarians at the county fairs and the parades, and boy, did they have to take some heat. Often pointed out with as the tinfoil hat types, in a nation that didn't know that it was on the beginning of a journey to socialism, right? What's the old line? You pay great honor to your political ancestors. So congratulations on your effort. I can't wait to meet you guys. And again, I was up there a couple of years ago. Can't wait to get up there. And it is a privilege to serve on the political field of battle with the Libertarian Party of Maine and all of you. So thanks again, buddy. Thanks for coming on tonight. We're going to take this YouTube thing and we're going to share it around. We had a little bit of a Facebook logistical issue. You got to link the licenses and all this kind of stuff, but we're going to get your message out this week. It's going to be all about the Libertarian Party of Maine this week. So we'll talk soon. To everybody, thanks for listening in tonight. You'll hear more from us next weekend. Might even be boots on the ground broadcasting from Maine to continue the beginnings of what I think is going to be an astonishing year for the Libertarian Party. Folks, you've been listening to Candidates Corner, if you will, on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian National Committee. Whitney Bilyeu serving as a chair. As always, my big thanks to John Gapso, who's on the big board. I'm your host, Pat Ford. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll be back at you soon. Have a wonderful weekend. And folks, take it personally, all right? We'll see you soon.